So, if you want the dessert, that's the cool explosions, the fast passes of jets, the growling of tanks, you'll have to eat the greens first, and the greens are ethics, politics, engineering, and history, and I don't think this is really emphasised enough, and I don't think it has to be necessarily a drag, because actually, it's pretty interesting. So, you may think that this is irrelevant, and I'm no historian, but this is really quite relevant. In an age where we are lucky enough to have war, which has a strict code of conduct, theoretically, we need to think back to times when this wasn't the case, when war was different. We need to think back to the places that we derive our system of modern war ethics from. And today I've chosen Egypt and its concept of Maat. Now, Maat was actually pretty formative across a lot of the world because it is sort of the cradle of civilization, and it spread quite quickly. If not, we saw organic development of a similar concept in a lot of different nations. The idea of Maat is basically derived from the goddess. Maat is a goddess in ancient Egypt. She's pretty easily recognizable. She looks quite a bit like Isis. I won't go into the mythology, but she is slightly different. And beyond, let's say, Ra, Anubis, Osiris, Sobek, Horus, Maat is pretty recognizable in general. Pretty well known. Anyway, with this concept of the goddess Maat, later came the idea of her as a symbol for truth, balance, order, law, morality, justice within the world. Harmony is a good way to put it. And largely this is what the latter ancient Egyptians would base their system of war ethics on. In effect, it meant that the Egyptians would go to war as a means by which to restore order, harmony in the world, and of course appease the gods in doing so. It seems rudimentary, but it's actually really key in the development of human war ethics. War had to be, back in those days even if the reason was somewhat bogus, for an identifiable reason that was in order to bring harmony and order. It couldn't necessarily just be on a whim, it had to fall into the criteria. The concept of Maat is different to our idea of order today. We might think of this order, this justice, this peace, this harmony, as effectively trying to restore peace within a region. The Egyptians didn't think like that. They basically saw restoring order as running anybody who the gods frowned upon out of Egypt or anywhere near them, and that was justified for them. And they did this in order to appease the gods, because they thought that the gods basically appreciated order and that Egypt was a divine vessel as a nation to carry out the purpose of the gods, and the pharaoh was the great communicator. But nonetheless, they maintain that war should be for a reason, an identifiable reason that would please these gods, and that would reflect well on Egypt as effectively the chosen state. Egypt held three things at the centre of their war ethics. The first is the idea that Egypt, as a nation, as I've said, is a divine vessel. It has a divine role that it has to fulfill. It has a cosmological place in the universe, or a cosmic place in the universe, rather. And its role is really significant. It is a special state. Second was the idea that the pharaoh was the executor of the will of the gods and the communicator with them. He had the responsibility, not just the option, but the responsibility to go to war if the gods desired it. And the third is that the Egyptian state was superior to all nations, all peoples, and through this, the concept of Maat, which outlines it, comes to pass. The Egyptian state that saw that if it had a reason, a means by which to fulfill Egypt's cosmic role, that it could rely upon the pharaoh to come up with the proper reason that the gods wanted, and then through this, other peoples that were not perhaps Egyptian could fulfill their correct place in the universe, which was not being in Egypt. In any case, if Pharaoh wanted to do something, and he communicated with the gods, then war was not only something which was an option, but it was the good thing, it was the right thing to do. It was a mandate by the Pharaoh to carry out. It was his role, his job, not merely an option. And in that sense, while one could say that, I guess, the mythic Egyptian religion is made up, to the Egyptians, at least, it wasn't just going to war on the whim of a dictator, it was going to war on the basis of the plan of the gods. So this is actually pretty really actually quite important as a basis for war ethics. It seems a bit ridiculous right now to be praising something so simple and actually something so barbaric, but unlike Mesopotamia, which relied purely on gods, this is the first real recorded instance of people really codifying and developing a culture around their specific ethics of war and making those consistent, because it was so tied to their mythology, so tied to their religion. And this is to the point that monuments were raised to commemorate the ability of the great pharaoh to communicate with the gods, to command war, to bring justice and harmony, of Egypt as the chosen state. And that's actually really, really important, the idea of codification of these values. And this is where we begin. I'm going to do a few more episodes on this because I think there are some important ones. But the concept of Maat has spread reasonably far, as I've said. Either it actually spread to nations that were neighbouring, or it was created organically in more rudimentary nations before they developed. And it's actually a key stage in looking at the development of war ethics if we're looking at the organic development within nations. This concept of Maat, and you can call it other things, generally just order, justice, harmony, can be found in many nations, and it's generally the first or the second step of development organically. The first being it's commanded by the gods, and it would appease the gods. And the second being that there is a responsibility to create order for the gods. There is a responsibility for the state, for a certain person, to create order for the gods, and this should be done in a manner which is measured, which is recorded, which isn't just done on a whim, but is done through thought, through prayer, that sort of thing. It gives war a certain gravitas, a certain responsibility. It's no longer, at this point, just something which happens. It's something which happens for a direct reason. I've waffled on too long now, but nonetheless, I do think it is important that we look at this sort of stuff. I'll leave it there.